Hey everyone, Scott Sambucci here, ready to rock and roll. We're going to dive right in, and today what we want to look at is a deeper dive on the what, or the what problem are you solving. So we did a short introduction and opened up a few ideas, thinking about what problems that you're solving with your product, with your service last time. And now we're going to take a deeper dive into this because it's so critical to understanding how to connect with customers from the beginning. And as we start off, sometimes it can feel like we're searching for the needle in the haystack a little bit here. But there's a really good reason why we say that we want to sell the problem you solve, not the product, right? So customers don't care about your product. What they care about are the problems that you have. And so why is this important? Well, first is that if you don't know your customer's problem at its root, then really what you are is a hammer looking for a nail. And you're talking past your customers, you're not talking with them. And the good news is, though, that when you know your customer's problem, when you find that needle in the haystack, you become a trusted partner, and you're dealing directly with executives and decision makers. And your customers are going to be more open, more honest. They're going to air their dirty laundry. They're going to tell you the skeletons in the closet. They're going to tell you what the real problem is and all of the politics involved at their company as to why that problem hasn't been solved in the past. And they're really going to bring you in as a partner. And so it's critical that we really learn how to connect with our customers at the core level as to what problems it is that they are out to solve. And once we know what those problems are, and once we can identify the problem that we do solve with our product or service, then the good news is that what this is going to do is it's going to help you win bigger deals, because you're going to be dealing with more top level executives or more senior people. And those people obviously are going to have bigger budgets, and identifying problems that are much bigger are going to require a bigger expenditure on their behalf to solve those problems. And you're also going to be able to solve those problems and get bigger deals in less time, because you're dealing with decision makers. They're going to be able to push down through the organization to accelerate the process, as opposed to working from the bottom up. Now, it doesn't mean that these things can happen overnight. What it does mean, though, is that there are opportunities in partnering with those executives, and they can kind of grease the wheels or grease the skids a little bit when it comes to getting your product approved for that purchase. Sound good? Good. So last time, when we first introduced this idea of what problem are we solving, we covered four significant problems that we said were worth solving. So improving coordination, meaning that either between business units that are interacting with each other, there's always and oftentimes in big organizations or even small organizations, there's often a disconnect between how one business unit might be producing results and how another business unit is producing. And oftentimes those two business units need to be working together. And so that's one example of how there's as an executive level, that's a problem worth solving. Another way to think about the coordination problem, we said, was that at the high level, the senior executives have their strategies, they have their vision of the future on how their companies should be operating and what the opportunities are for their companies. And then when they try to implement those strategies downstream with different business units, oftentimes those business units aren't executing the way that those executives have imagined. And so if you're able to show how you can coordinate and improve that coordination between the strategy level and the tactical level within an organization, then that's a big problem to solve. Another problem that we said we're solving was increasing X efficiency. And this is just really, if you remember, this is just the idea of improving output based on the same number of inputs. So from a labor force standpoint, as an example, if I've got a 50-person team that's in a call center, as an executive or as a business leader, I'm making certain assumptions, or I have certain measurements that are saying there should be a certain level of output for each of those employees, or output per employee. And if for some reason that those employees are not producing at that output level, well, then there's some inefficiency within the organization. And so sometimes that can be solved with technology, whether that means providing better software so that those individual contributors can do their jobs more efficiently or faster, or produce better results. Say if it's a customer call center, and you're looking for ways to improve how the inbound customer complaints are being handled. Well, if you can show how you can solve the problem of increasing happiness for their customers, then you're increasing X efficiency. And those are big problems that executives deal with every day. We say creating new information is a big problem. So a lot of times there's a lot of manual process, or as an executive, I'm looking for day-to-day or week-to-week or month-to-month visibility as to how my business is operating. And oftentimes that information is only getting provided to the executive in qualitative ways or anecdotal ways. And so oftentimes if there's ways to produce actual data that can create new information that can show day-to-day or week-to-week or month-to-month how a business unit is in fact operating, then that's something that as an executive that I'm interested in solving that problem. And then the fourth thing that we said was a problem with solving, which is reducing transaction cost. Or you can think of this, I don't think I mentioned this last time, but you can think of this as friction. So within an organization, there's a lot of times there is friction that occurs. So if one business unit is working with another business unit and it just takes a long time for one process to get completed, then there's some kind of friction there. So if you can show how you can resolve that friction, then that's a big piece of the puzzle for a key executive. And then also the customer and their customers, oftentimes there can be friction. So for example, if your customer is producing a product and they're trying to get it to their customers in a more efficient way, whether that means producing a better product or reducing the amount of training time or getting that product to their customers more quickly, those are all examples of friction. Those are all transaction costs. And so if you can show that you can reduce those transaction costs, then that's a big win for an executive on multiple levels. So those are four areas that we said, or these are four problems we're solving. And so I was thinking more about this, and as I was doing some of my own research for myself, what I discovered is that there's actually a lot. There are several other problems that are worth solving at the executive level. And this really what I want to share today is giving you a couple of other areas that as you're considering your product, your market, your target customers, and even your past customers, and trying to identify what was the real reason they purchased your product, looking back, then you might be able to think about this in other ways. And so that with your future customers, as you're dealing with your sales opportunities today, as you're developing new opportunities into the future, then perhaps there's a chance for you to identify with some of these other new problems, a few more problems worth solving. And then that will really help you hone in on what problem it is that you actually solve with your product or service. And then that will later allow you to then target the right people within those organizations and the right industries and segments that you do the best job of solving those problems for. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's move into a couple of these new problems, or a few more problems we're solving. So the first one is regulatory and compliance. And so this is something that, as I've done a lot of research, I know personally I've dealt with this when I did a lot of work in the software for mortgage industry. So in the mortgage industry, there's all kinds of new regulations and all kinds of new compliance rules that are out there over the last few years since the mortgage crash going back into the late, say 2008, 2009. There's been all of these compliance and regulatory overlays that are now required for mortgage lenders to transact and do business with their consumers. And so in the mortgage world, there's just a huge amount of opportunity even today, even though a lot of those laws have been passed in 2009, 2010, 2011. Some of those laws and regulations are just now going into effect. And so here we are 5, 6 years down the road, and companies are still dealing with how to interpret these rules, how to implement these rules, how to make sure they're compliant with these new rules and regulations. And so that's just one example within one industry. And if you think about, most industries have some kind of regulatory compliance issue. So in healthcare, there's the HIPAA rules and regulations that are out there, and those affect so many different healthcare providers, insurance providers, health and wellness companies, hospitals, other sorts of service providers. Those are all affected by HIPAA. In the food and drug vertical, there's the FDA. So there's all kinds of rules and regulations around that. You can think about this in the telecommunications industry and in other industries where consumer privacy is a big deal. So how do you make sure that consumer data is protected when they're doing a phone call or they have an email being sent through your system? So you can really, if you think about the industries that you target, and think about where you've solved problems in the past or where you think you can solve problems today into the future. One of the big problems out there to solve for executives is regulatory and compliance. So regardless of industry, it's worth taking a look at your particular industries that you target and consider how your product may, in fact, help your companies, your target companies, solve for some of these regulatory and compliance burdens in front of them. So that's a big one that I know is out there. So another big problem that's worth solving is automation and digitization of the enterprise. So obviously, most companies are running some type of software in order to run their business, right? Well, all software is not created equal. And a lot of people start startups because they are creating software to replace the software of yesterday. And so, an executive looking at ways to increase efficiency within the organization or reduce costs or provide a better experience for their employees and their customers, automation is one way to think about how they can do that. And digitization, whether that's around data that they have in paper documents or digitization of processes that have been manual in the past, or taking and I saw this a lot of different ways in the mortgage industry, where a lot of the processes within the mortgage industry were being handled with spreadsheets that were on a SharePoint website. And so one team would fill out a spreadsheet and then they would update it and then notify the next team that, hey, I entered my data, now it's your turn to put in your data. And then that next team would put in their data and then they would pass it on. And that was the way of handling processes within mortgage lenders. And this is rampant. And I choose mortgage lenders because I've worked in that industry in the past. But this is a problem that is rampant across many, many industries. And executives know this, and they know it's a problem because they're wasting a lot of man hours on very manual processes. And they also know that that introduces a lot of risks for them. So if data is getting entered into a spreadsheet, how easy is it for a spreadsheet to get deleted? Or how easy is it for somebody to fat finger information that's going to a spreadsheet? And if that spreadsheet is being passed down to 10 other people, by the time it gets to the 11th person, nobody's going to know that there's an error that was put in by the second or third person. And so automation and digitization and trying to use more data and try to get better data out of the company is a huge priority for a lot of executives right now. And so again, think about how you might take a manual process that exists or a process that takes a lot of steps, and how does your product either automate a process where it takes the human element out of it, or how does it digitize data, or how does it digitize a process within an organization? Because as an executive, these big infrastructure problems are ones that they are focusing on. So that's another key problem to think about, and it's one that executives are thinking about. So again, think about your product or service and how does it, if possible, serve to automate or digitize an enterprise. So the next big problem that a lot of executives are facing are attracting and retaining talent. And so I was working with a company that is in the benefits world. And so they have a certain type of benefits package that they're selling to VPs of benefits or HR people. And there are certain types of customers that they can target where they know that turnover happens to be really high. And so their benefit package is one that they think would reduce turnover at the organizations that they're targeting, at the companies they're targeting. And so this is just an example of how, what seems to be, well, a benefits package would benefit the employees. And so you could very easily fall into the trap of selling to the companies that you're targeting and saying, well, here's why our benefits package is so great for your employees, because it adds all these extra things to it and makes the employees happier. Well, that's okay, and that's an okay way to position your product or service. If instead, though, you can reverse that and say, yes, of course, we're offering a benefits package that's just going to enhance the relationship that you have with your employees, but even better, right? Selling to the top level executive, like getting into the conversation that's saying, like, how much turnover do you have at your company? How hard is it to attract great talent? How hard is it to retain great talent? And what are the costs associated with attracting and retaining good talent? And now all of a sudden, as a key executive, you're sitting there, and at the end of every year, a lot of executives are sitting there thinking to themselves, okay, which of my top employees, which of my all-stars do I have to worry about leaving after they collect this year's bonus check? I mean, this is rampant in the financial industry. It's rampant in other industries where on an annual basis, these people are getting big bonuses. And so after they collect that big bonus check, they're thinking about, well, where can I now take the next step in my career? So I'm going to work through the end of this year, and then within Q1 of next year, I'm going to hop over to another firm that's going to offer me a promotion and better salary and better benefits and all these other things. And so this is a headache that executives have to deal with all the time, all the time. And that's why there's entire groups within companies that are dedicated to recruiting, and then benefits, and then doing employee engagement activities, everything to try to keep the employees happy. And so you can think about it as yourself. You're running your companies, however big or small that they are. I mean, think about the people that work with you at your company. If you're a startup CEO or you're a leader within your company, and you know you've got a couple of really great people that have been working with you for a while, you probably at some point in time, you've probably thought to yourself like, man, what am I going to do if this person leaves? This is going to crush me, especially if you're a small company and that person's a big contributor. You're going to be sitting there like, oh man, I can't, like, it took me forever to get this guy up and running. And now that he's up and running, he's been a wonderful contributor. He's a key part of the organization. If this guy leaves, man, I'm in big, big trouble. I'm going to have a hard time replacing this person. And so, you're thinking about it as a small company, and I am sure, and I know that this is a big problem that big executives are thinking about at big companies. So if in some way that your product or service helps to attract and retain talent, then that's a problem worth solving. And so you want to think about how you can position your product or service as a way to solve this problem for companies that you're targeting. So another problem that people are looking to solve is accelerating innovation. And it's a little bit different than the past one, which we talked about automation and digitization. Those are more, you can think about automation and digitization as simply like operations and how do we get more efficient, how do we reduce costs. The idea of accelerating innovation, here what we're talking about is like, how do I as a company, if I'm an executive sitting there and saying like, how do I make sure that we are producing the best products for our customers? How are we dealing with competitors that are out there? And how are we dealing with upstarts and other startups that are coming up with new products and new services and creating brand new strategies all around us to satisfy brand new customer needs? Because especially as an established company, like think about how quickly consumer behavior changes, how quickly can consumer perspectives and consumer needs change. And so if you're a big company with a lot of bureaucracy and you're trying to figure out like, how do we make sure we keep our customers happy? Well, if those customer needs change really quickly, but your product development cycle is a year or 2 years or 5 years. Look, as an example, at McDonald's, I was at a conference and there's a woman speaking there who was head of consumer experience at McDonald's. And it takes them 7 years from idea to implementation to get a new concept actually like completely rolled out at McDonald's. 7 years. And so if you're McDonald's, you're sitting there like, how do we accelerate innovation? Like, how do we get faster than 7 years? There's a lot of good reasons why it takes that long for them. There's a lot of bad reasons that it takes that long for them. And so again, as a top executive, you're thinking about like, how do we keep up with the changing consumer environment, the changing markets, changing technology, all the competitors that are out there? One of the things that I'm trying to think about is like, how do I get my teams to produce more quickly and solve for the newer customer needs that are out there so that we don't lose those hard-earned customers that have been customers and faithful to us for many, many years. So accelerating innovation is a key problem worth solving for executives. And that actually brings us to the next one. The next problem we're solving is just voice of the customer. And so you see this a lot in annual reports, which we'll talk about in a little while. The voice of the customer is thinking about how do I, in tandem with accelerating innovation, how do I as a company, how do I collect information about what our customers think about us? What are their new preferences? What kind of products do they want to see from us that they're getting from other people or they haven't seen in the market? What products do we have now that they're no longer happy with or they're starting to get frustrated with? That's because those products are not keeping up with the times. And so you can think about accelerating innovation and voice of the customer as kind of a 1-2 punch here. So if I'm a key executive at a company, I'm thinking about like, how do I create an environment such that I can very quickly listen to my customers and very quickly respond to those customer needs and show my customers that I am listening to them. And so there's been obviously in the last few years a big push on social media, and there's big companies that are doing this great, are doing a great job on social media, and they're responding very quickly to the voice of the customer. And there's big companies that are not doing this at all, still 5, 6, 7 years after kind of this social media boom. And so this tells you that big companies, small companies, lots of companies out there are still dealing with and wrestling with how do they deal with this voice of the customer? How do they get information from the customers that the customers want to share with them, good, bad, or indifferent? And how do they then respond to that? So if you think about this as a problem we're solving, consider how your product or service will help you speak to a key executive at your target companies and say, listen, this is a problem that we solve for you. We help you respond more quickly to your customer voices, or we help you identify what those voices are and what people are saying. So this is obviously a big problem we're solving, and it's one that you might want to consider. And so the last problem I want you to think about is reducing volatility. And so again, thinking about this from an executive mindset, executives on a day-to-day basis they're not always looking at the numbers on a day-to-day basis. For example, let's say you're an executive in a retail environment. Let's say at Nordstrom's or Macy's, you might not be, it's likely you're not looking at sales numbers on a day-to-day basis until maybe the last month of the year when it's holiday shopping season. Then you might be looking at the numbers because that's where you're going to make your number or not make your number for the year. But basically, as an executive, what you're really looking at is how do we smooth out our growth? How do we smooth out how quickly we accelerate with new products? How do we reduce the volatility within our organizations, whether that's internal volatility with how products are being produced? If there's downtime with our machinery or our systems, then that's going to introduce a lot of volatility to the production rates within our organization, but also reducing volatility with, for example, revenue and new sales. Because if there's in the retail environment suffers from this, where they track along, they have a couple of holiday bumps throughout the course of the year where they might get a little pop in sales, but at the end of the year, around Christmas time and the holiday season, that's where they really get the boost. And so if you're an executive, you're thinking there in the retail environment, saying to yourself, well, how could I push sales forward? How can I get more out of our customers earlier in the year so that I'm not so dependent on December sales to make my number? Like reducing that volatility and that dependency on a single month of the year is a key issue for retail executives. And so I use that as an example because it's one we can all identify with. We all do our holiday shopping all at the same time. And so it's one you can think about very concretely. So take this concept and apply it to your target industries, your companies that you're working with, and consider, do those companies that we deal with have volatility? If it's a sports team, is there volatility in attendance, for example? If you're dealing with, I'm just trying to think of an example. If you're dealing with a telecommunications company, is there volatility in terms of customer acquisition based on when new plans are expiring, old plans are expiring, or when an iPhone is being shipped? And you know that, hey, when the new iPhone is getting shipped, then that's an opportunity for me to go and acquire a new customer. So that I have this one opportunity to burst and get a whole bunch of new customers because people might be willing to change their contracts at that time. But the rest of the time, if I'm dependent just on that burst around a new iPhone getting introduced, then I'm kind of in big trouble if I'm not successful with that burst. And so I want to look for ways to reduce my volatility. Is there other ways I can kind of expand my portfolio of customer acquisition in the telecommunication wireless space? So those are just a couple of examples. Again, you just want to take this and apply it to your business and see if, in fact, this is a problem that you can solve for your customers. So just to recap, again, in the first introduction to the Q framework and thinking about the what behind what problem are you solving, these are the 4 that we talked about before: coordination, efficiency, information, and transaction cost, or think of that as friction. And then the couple of these new concepts that I share with you today are regulatory and compliance, automation and digitization, attracting and retaining talent, accelerating innovation, voice of the customer, and reducing volatility. So, it's unlikely that your product is going to solve all of these problems for your customers. It might be a case where there's more than one. You might have like an A level problem that you can solve, and then a B level problem that's the result of that. So for example, like again, using my experience in the financial market, in the mortgage area, if you had a software that could solve regulatory and compliance, and the way it does that is by automating and digitizing certain processes, well, now you've actually knocked out two problems with your product. Because in the past, if the bank was dealing with regulatory problems simply by hiring consultants or doing a lot of like end of month reporting or trying to extract data and reports out of the field team, that's a very manual process, and it's very cumbersome and very expensive. And so meanwhile, they're also trying to automate and digitize their infrastructure and try to digitize their company. So if your product or your service or your software, for example, was able to automate and digitize, and by doing that, it could then solve the regulatory and compliance problems. Now you've ticked off two of these big problems. So so now what? So that's just sort of like the introduction to some of the new concepts I wanted to share with you this week. I hope that's gotten your mind churning a little bit. You've got your brain working in ways that that you hadn't thought about this before. So take these ideas, and in the next presentation, what we're going to talk about is getting practical, getting tactical in terms of specifically how can you find these problems for the industries and companies that you're targeting. And so I'm going to give you a couple of examples and ideas and places where you can go and find these problems, and then use those problems that you found as a way to communicate and do your outreach, and double back to maybe some leads that have gotten a little dark on you, maybe a way to resurface those conversations. So that's it for now. This is the what problem are you solving deep dive. I hope it's been helpful, and definitely look forward to the next presentation with you. Thanks.